Today, we'll be looking at why humans share 99.9% of their DNA with one another. The fact is, there are plenty of other species out there that exhibit much higher genetic diversity than us boring Homo sapiens. Just take a look at this graph to my right. Homo sapiens are amongst the least genetically diverse species out there. Despite all of our physical differences, genetically, us, Homo sapiens, only differ by around 0.1%. Compare this 0.1% to fruit flies, where each fruit fly within the Drosophila melanogaster species can have its DNA vary by up to 5%, while the red-backed fairy wren, a bird native to Australia, shows genetic diversity of around 2 to 3%. My name is Hashem, and I'm a medical doctor, and today I'll be telling you the story of how humans ended up much more genetically identical than most other species, and what that tells us about our history. So when we think about genetic diversity, we look at SNPs, also known as single nucleotide polymorphisms. A SNP is a variation in a single nucleotide in a single position out of the possible 3 billion long nucleotide positions that we call human DNA. Now, not all SNPs are equal. When considering SNPs that contribute to our genetic diversity, we're only really interested in the SNPs that are introduced by mutations into the germline, the cells that go on to make up our sperm and egg cells, giving us you, me, and everyone else. Mutations acquired in somatic cells as an adult aren't found in the sperm and egg cells, and therefore they're not passed to the next generation, making them completely irrelevant when studying human genetic diversity. They basically live and they die with you. The reason for Homo sapiens' close genetic relatedness was long ascribed to the fact that us, Homo sapiens, are a fairly young species that emerged somewhere in eastern Africa around 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, which apparently is a controversial thing for me to say for some absurd fucking reason. It's honestly fucking bizarre seeing the number of people online who reject this idea of Homo sapiens originating in Africa. So let me be clear, abundantly clear. Humans came from Africa. All humans. All of them. If that fact upsets you, please believe when I say that no one is more upset at that fact than me. I, for one, wish the evolution deniers and racists had instead spawned from some other dark corner of the galaxy, far, far away from all the rest of us. Unfortunately, we can't have everything in life, so we got to do with what we have. The archaeological evidence isn't even relevant at this stage, because the genetic evidence is just that strong. We know, for example, the genetic diversity in Africa is higher than it is in any other part of the world, and that almost all non-African genetic diversity is a subset of African genetic diversity. What this means is that the vast majority of SNPs that we talked about earlier that we find in Europeans and Asians today are also found in Africans, and that there is more genetic variation within African populations than there is between Africans and Europeans or between Africans and Asians. Altogether, these facts indicate three things. If you're a Homo sapien, you came from Africa, and not even that long ago. Second, if you're alive, your ancestors spent a majority of their evolutionary history in Africa rather than outside of Africa. Third, if you're not African, you descend from one of the many small groups of people who left Africa to start populations across the globe. What's interesting, however, is that despite us emerging as a separate species just 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, you should still expect to see more genetic variation in Homo sapiens, at least much more than what we currently see today. So until very recently, we used to think that human populations first made their way out of Africa 60,000 to 80,000 years ago, as that is what the vast majority of the genetic evidence research on modern human populations suggested. Recent archaeological findings, however, well, they seem to contradict the genetics research. In other words, we have a bit of a problem Recently uncovered archaeological sites in Israel have found ancient human remains dating back to at least 140,000 years ago. One archaeological finding even goes as far as to push that date back to 180,000 years ago, clearly showing that some Homo sapiens did manage to venture out of Africa long before what's suggested. Begging the question, why then does the genetics research suggest a much later out of Africa date? The answer is actually really simple. It's because the genetics research is done on modern humans, people like you and I, who are unfortunately very much still alive in this messed up timeline that we're all trapped in. This matters because while there may have been ancient Homo sapiens who did make it out of Africa all the way back 140,000 or even 180,000 years ago, it's possible, probable, most likely that these ancient humans don't have many, if any, surviving descendants today, which is something us modern humans always struggle to wrap our myopic brains around because we view history through a modern lens. What I'm saying is that we're so used to our modern luxuries and bending nature to our will that we sometimes forget that until very recently we were the ones at nature's mercy rather than things being the other way around. Take the bubonic plague, colloquially known as the Black Death, for example. It was a single pathogenic strain of bacteria that just like that wiped out a third of Europe's population, potentially taking away a third of Europe's genetic diversity with it. The people who died of the plague before bringing any children into the world definitely existed, but they have no living descendants today. Their genetic diversity is lost, and so they're invisible to any genetic studies we carry out on modern people. So why then did those early humans who made it out of Africa 140,000 or 180,000 years ago become invisible? Why did their descendants not survive to the present day? Genetic evidence shows that 75,000 years ago, after having left Africa, our ancient ancestors went running back to Africa.
Hi, honey, I'm home.
Except, of course, they weren't intentionally running to Africa. What they were actually doing was running away, migrating in all directions, spreading all across the globe in the blind hope of finding a new, more hospitable home. The reason the genetic evidence shows a migration into Africa is because it was only the ones who ended up back in Africa that managed to survive in any meaningful numbers. All the other people don't appear in our genetics today because either they or some descendants of theirs failed to survive and continue passing their genes through offspring. What triggered this cataclysmic event was a super-volcanic eruption. Allow me to introduce you to the Youngest Toba eruption. This volcanic eruption was nearly 1,000 times more powerful than the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, which famously destroyed Pompeii. Mount Vesuvius itself was 100,000 times more powerful than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Youngest Toba eruption was so incredibly powerful, it even changed the Earth's crust, leaving behind Lake Toba, a lake which happens to be 440 square miles in surface area. I did the maths, and that's about 20 Manhattan Islands, if you're wondering. Entirely created from a single supervolcanic event 75,000 years ago. According to this research paper, the emissions of Mount Toba's eruption were strong enough to cool some parts of the Earth by up to 10 degrees centigrade. However, one part that was spared the worst of this volcanic winter was Africa, which only cooled by around 2 degrees centigrade. This explains why when we carry out genetic tests on people alive today, our models suggest a much later out of Africa date than the archaeological evidence. It's not that no humans made it out of Africa before 60,000 years ago, but the vast majority of the people who did and failed to return back to Africa in the aftermath of the Toba eruption, these people likely died out, leaving no descendants alive today. So don't go around calling them grandpa and grandma. They're not your ancestors. Their genetic diversity was lost, and only the genetic diversity of the humans living in this area in Eastern Africa was preserved. This is called the Toba Catastrophe theory. It proposes that the number of humans roaming the earth dropped to a perilous 20,000 individuals from which we are all descended. Now, I feel like this is the point where I need to say that the Toba Catastrophe theory was first proposed in the 1990s. However, later research in the early 2010s appeared to refute the theory, as scientists' climate modeling suggested that the volcanic winter wouldn't have been severe enough to cause such a catastrophic drop in human population numbers. That said, things seem to be swaying back again in favor of the Toba catastrophe theory. For example, this paper, published in Nature in 2021, does conclude that the volcanic winter that followed the eruption would have been very, very severe. It makes this conclusion by taking into account the effects of ozone depletion caused by volcanic emissions, which many of the papers published in the 2010s overlooked. All in all, ozone depletion would have augmented cooling effects caused by volcanic emissions, which I'm aware sounds counterintuitive, but I'm no climate scientist. I had a conversation about this with a friend of mine who's actually a climate scientist at MIT, and according to her, yes, ozone depletion can cool the Earth's temperature. She's one of the smartest people I know, so I believe her, I guess. Yeah, so yes, it does. Either way, back to my area of specialty.
Did you take any science classes in school?
Sure, I did the one with the frogs.
The one with the frogs.
We call events like these population bottleneck events because they result in a huge reduction in the population of a species, and therefore in that species' genetic diversity. However, this is hardly the only population bottleneck event in our long and sorry history. According to a 2023 paper published in Science, a much more severe population catastrophe occurred long before we even became Homo sapiens around 900,000 years ago. For their research, the scientists sequenced the genomes of 3,000 individuals alive today and used genetic statistical modeling to conclude that all humans alive today appear to have descended from fewer than 1,280 people that lived 900,000 years ago. Interestingly, this population bottleneck is estimated to have lasted for around 117,000 years and explains the dramatic fossil gap that we see in the archaeological record from that time. Basically, archaeologists tend to find a lot of remains belonging to human ancestors before 900,000 years and after 780,000 years ago, but not in between. Nice, don't you just love it when archaeology and genetics concur? It's unclear what could have caused this prolonged population bottleneck, but some interesting theories suggest it may have been caused by a shift in the Earth's orbital cycles, which happened around that time, that basically fucked our ancestors up until they managed to adequately control fire. Personally, I'm just not that convinced of this fire theory. It feels a little unsubstantiated. What we do know, at least according to a 2022 study, is that it was during that time that our ancestors ended up with 46 chromosomes rather than the 48 chromosomes that we find in other great apes like chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans. What seems to have happened was a chromosome fusion event where two separate chromosomes fused together, giving us our modern chromosome 2. While this may seem insignificant, it may have been the final nail in the coffin that completely reproductively isolated the ancestors of modern humans with their 46 chromosomes from their ancient great ape with their 48 chromosomes. Which makes me wonder, could reproductive isolation have been the reason for the population bottleneck?
Dear viewer, this is the part of the video where things get weird. Good weird, but weird.
I don't know, to be honest, and I won't lie to you, this theory of mine is totally bonkers. You'll probably be laughed out of the room if you say it out loud to any self-respecting scientist, so please don't. But since I've lost all my self-respect long ago, sometime in 1995, I'll go there. Just know that this is just pure speculation on my part. The reason this idea of mine is so bonkers is because of the implication that the ancestors of humans were still breeding with great apes a million years ago, like gorillas and chimpanzees, even after having been separated from them for 5 million years or so, evolutionarily speaking. But here's the thing. That thing is pretty big. Well, it's not actually big, it's small, but it's a big small thing. That big small thing is herpes simplex virus 2, aka genital herpes. So humans, didn't always have it. In fact, we're fairly sure that some ancestor of ours acquired it via cross-species transmission from chimpanzees 1.6 million years ago, suggesting that despite being separated by more than 4 or 5 million years of evolutionary history, our ancestors may have been somewhat intimate with chimpanzees 1.6 million years ago. Further to that, humans and chimpanzees have chromosomes that are more structurally similar to one another than the chromosomes of horses and zebras, which we know can produce healthy offspring. Moreover, and please believe me when I say I wish I did not know this, but since I know it, I'm gonna torture you guys with sharing that knowledge with you.
Do you now believe me when I said this would get weird?
There were some experiments back in 1992 that showed that human sperm could attach to a gorilla and gibbon egg cell just as well as it attached to a human egg cell. So while this idea may be pure speculation on my part, there are at least some things that point to this idea of reproductive isolation created by the fusion of two chromosomes as being the reason for the population bottleneck our ancestors experienced or suffered 900,000 years ago. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get back on topic. While we may have traveled back, far back, into our history in search of examples of bottleneck events, we really did not need to. There is a much more recent bottleneck. So one thing that's long baffled scientists is the drop in male genetic diversity that's seen in the late Neolithic period, sometime between 5000 and 3000 BC. The reason this is extra interesting is that there is no concurrent drop in female genetic diversity. We know this because while diversity of Y chromosomes decreased during that period, the genetic diversity of the maternal mitochondrial DNA was largely maintained. This basically rules out a catastrophic event. So what caused this bottleneck? So a study published in Nature this year suggests that this bottleneck emerged as a result of the rise of patrilineal inheritance systems. In other words, the scientists argue that humans in the late Neolithic period transitioned from a quasi-meritocratic society where the strongest man would emerge as the tribal leader to one where tribal leadership was passed from father to son, favoring certain males over others. Eventually, this would also extend to things like property rights as well, where a few rich and powerful men living in these ancient agrarian societies created male genetic bottlenecks by exercising ownership and control over land, property, and their female relatives too, using these privileges to overrepresent themselves in the gene pool at the expense of other men who may not have had access to the same privileges. To be honest, this theory holds up pretty well, if for no other reason than the fact that 1 in 8 men alive today in the area of the former Mongol Empire are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. And before you start listing all of Genghis Khan's infamous atrocities, which I'm well aware of, remember that Genghis is hardly the only example. A 2006 study by scientists at Trinity College Dublin showed that 21% of men alive today in northwestern Ireland and 8% in the entirety of Ireland are all carrying the Y chromosome of a legendary 5th century Irish king, Niall of the Nine Hostages. I know people will argue that 1500 years ago was a really long time ago, so of course we'll start to see a lot of shared ancestors. But while that's certainly true, there is no denying that King Niall's Y chromosome is certainly overrepresented here. The phenomenon of pedigree collapse is definitely a thing, I'm not denying that, but the point I'm trying to make is that pedigree doesn't collapse or coalesce equally, nor does it do that fairly, but tends to coalesce on powerful and wealthy men more than it does on ordinary men. The reality is that we're all a product of some unintentional breeding program that's made us much more alike than most of us would care to admit. Perhaps that's because admitting that we're so much alike might open the door to some awkward conversations. What we are, however, is survivors. Every single one of us. Survivors with so much shared history, battling super-volcanic eruptions and other curveballs that nature threw our way. trying to squeeze out our diversity, making us more alike and reducing our differences. Even as human populations recovered and expanded, we were left with fewer unique individuals to carry out our species' legacy into the future. Even as we conquered nature and the earth became kinder to us, we created social structures that squeezed our gene pools further, making us much more alike today than we have ever been in our history. Yet, today, we use these same social structures to discriminate. Initially, I thought it was ironic, but perhaps it's by design. Perhaps it's humanity's dark destiny to keep squeezing our gene pool down further and further by draping up new imagined differences, creating conflict where there is none, until we're so much alike that our diversity is completely gone, weakened and yet completely unaware of this weakness, standing in line for one brisk cold to whisk our memory and legacy away into obscurity. Got a lot of mixed feelings about this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. My name is Hashem, and this was my last video for the year. See you all in 2025.